The sun rose over the Texas plains like a promise that had been broken too many times. Flat, endless grassland stretched in every direction, dotted with scrub brush and the ghosts of better seasons. The Doyle homestead sat alone in that vastness, a weathered wooden farmhouse that leaned slightly to the east, as if tired of standing against the wind. Mary Doyle knelt in what used to be a vegetable garden, her hands working soil that felt more like dust than earth. She was 22 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that had learned early how to hide worry behind steady eyes. Her blue calico dress was faded from too many washings, and her hands were rough from work that never seemed to end. The land doesn't lie, she thought as she pulled another dead plant from the ground. It tells you when hope is running out. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and lonely. Mary stood, wiping sweat from her forehead, and looked toward the house. Through the window, she could see her younger siblings sitting at the table with empty plates. Tommy was 8, Sarah 10, and little Beth only 6. They had learned not to complain about hunger. Inside the kitchen, the air was stale and warm. The wood stove sat cold to save fuel. Her father, John Doyle, sat slumped in a chair near the window, his face gaunt and gray. When he coughed, it was a wet, terrible sound that shook his whole body. "Mary," he said weakly when she entered, "we need to talk." Mary wiped the dirt from her hands on her apron, already knowing what was coming. Her father had that look, the one that said he was about to ask her to sacrifice something she didn't want to give. "The well's getting lower, Papa," she said, trying to change the subject. "We'll need to ration water more carefully." "It's not the well I'm worried about," John said. He pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket and held it out with a trembling hand. Mary took it and read slowly. The words were formal and cold, like the men who had written them. The bank was demanding payment, $300 by the end of the month, or they would take the property. $300, John said. Might as well be 3,000. The children watched from the table, their eyes too old for their young faces. They understood more than adults wanted to believe. "You need to think about marriage, Mary," her father said quietly. "Someone who can provide. I won't be here much longer to—" "Don't say that," Mary interrupted, her voice sharper than she intended. "It's the truth," John said firmly, "and truth is all we have left." Mary turned away, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. Marriage. The word felt like a trap closing around her. That evening, Mary sat alone on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. In her lap was a worn book she had borrowed from the school teacher, Modern Agriculture and Scientific Farming. She had read it 3 times, memorizing techniques she had no land or money to try. "If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 100 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to my channel and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue." In the distance, dust rose against the darkening sky. A rider approached on horseback, leading a pack mule. Mary stood, squinting into the twilight. The rider was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a simple work shirt and leather vest. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. He stopped at the fence and dismounted with the practiced ease of someone who had spent his life on horseback. When he removed his hat, Mary saw a weathered face, sun-darkened skin, and deep brown eyes that seemed to look at her with both warmth and careful reserve. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I'm looking for John Doyle." "He's inside," Mary said cautiously. "What's your business?" "Private business," the man said, with respect. Mary studied him. His boots were worn but well made. His clothes were dusty from travel but clean underneath. There was something in the way he stood, quiet and confident, that made her curious despite herself. "I'll fetch him," she said. Inside, she helped her father to his feet. They walked to the door together, John leaning heavily on her arm. The stranger stepped forward as they appeared on the porch. The two men measured each other in the fading light. "Mr. Doyle," the stranger said, "my name is Philip Rios. I heard in town about your situation." "Word travels fast when a man's drowning," John replied, his voice bitter. Philip didn't flinch. "I've come to propose marriage to your daughter." The words hung in the air like something solid. Mary felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "You don't know her?" John said slowly. "I know she's educated herself on farming methods most men ignore," Philip said. "I know she's kept your family together when everything fell apart. I know she's stronger than this place gives her credit for." Mary's eyes widened. How did he know these things? She had never seen this man before in her life. "And what do you want in return?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Philip met her gaze directly. "A partner, someone who sees land as more than dirt and cattle as more than money." John coughed, a rough sound that seemed to take all his strength. "What are you offering?" "I'll settle your debt," Philip said. "I'll make sure your family has provisions through next year, and Mary comes with me as my wife, by her choice, not by force." John's eyes glistened in the dim light. He looked at Mary, and she saw both relief and sorrow in his face. "It's your decision, daughter," he said quietly. Mary's hands trembled. Her mind raced through the impossible mathematics of their situation. $300. Winter coming. Her father dying slowly while pretending he wasn't. Her siblings growing thinner each week. Freedom or family? Pride or survival? "I need time to think," she said, surprised at how calm her voice sounded. Philip nodded as if he had expected this. "Fair enough. I'll return in 3 days." He put his hat back on, mounted his horse with fluid grace, and rode away into the twilight. Mary watched until he disappeared into the darkness, wondering if she had just seen salvation or made a terrible mistake by not refusing immediately. The next day, Mary walked into the small prairie town with Sarah at her side. The market square bustled with farmers and their families, but Mary felt the weight of stares as she passed. Whispers followed her like shadows. "That's the Doyle girl," someone murmured. "Heard a stranger proposed." "Must be desperate," another voice answered. "Or he's hiding something." Mary kept her head high and her eyes forward. She had learned long ago that people's opinions could not fill empty stomachs or pay debts. Inside the general store, she counted out her few coins on the counter. The shopkeeper, an older man with kind eyes named Mr. Henderson, watched sympathetically. "Heard Philip Rios came by your place," he said as he measured out flour. Mary looked up, surprised. "You know him?" "Passed through a few times," Mr. Henderson said. "Quiet man, pays his debts, treats people fair." He added an extra pound of flour to her purchase without asking for more money. "Sometimes a chance is all we get in this life, Miss Mary," he said gently. That night, Mary sat alone on the porch under a sky full of stars. The air had turned cold, and she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. She heard the horse before she saw it. Philip rode up slowly and dismounted. "May I sit?" he asked. Mary nodded, and he joined her on the steps, keeping a respectful distance between them. "Why me?" Mary asked after a long silence. "There must be women in town who would jump at a proposal from a rancher." "I don't want jumping," Philip said. "I want choosing." "You talk like an educated man, but you dress like a drifter." Philip smiled slightly. "Maybe I'm both. Maybe I'm neither." "That's not an answer," Mary said. "The world's changing, Mary," Philip said, looking out at the dark prairie. Railroads, telegraph lines, barbed wire fencing. The old ways are dying. We can die with them, or we can build something new. He turned to look at her directly, and in the starlight, his eyes were serious. "I believe you're meant for building," he said. Something in those words touched a buried hope inside Mary, a hope she had almost forgotten she still carried. 2 days later at dawn, 2 men in dark suits appeared at the Doyle farmhouse. They were bank agents with cold smiles and professional courtesy that felt like a threat. "Mr. Doyle," the first agent said, "we've come for payment or collateral." John coughed into his sleeve, trying to stand straight. "I asked for more time." "The bank has been generous," the second agent said. "We'll need the deed to the property today." The children huddled behind Mary, their small hands gripping her skirt. Mary felt something harden inside her chest, like iron cooling into shape. "You'll have your money," she said clearly. The first agent looked at her with barely concealed amusement. "From where, miss?" "From my future husband." The agents exchanged glances. The second one pulled out a pocket watch and checked it deliberately. "We'll return this evening," he said. "If payment isn't made, we take possession at dawn." After they left, John slumped in his chair, looking older than Mary had ever seen him. "Mary, you don't have to," he began. "Yes, I do," she said. That afternoon, Philip arrived with a wagon. Mary stood waiting, dressed in her best dress. It was still simple, still worn, but she had pressed it carefully and pinned her hair with the one good ribbon she owned. Her few belongings were packed in a small trunk her mother had brought from back east. Years ago, when hope still seemed reasonable, her family gathered around her. The children clung to her waist, and little Beth cried into her skirt. Sarah tried to be brave, but her lips trembled. Tommy stood stiff and silent, trying to be the man he wasn't yet old enough to be. John gripped Mary's hands, and his voice broke when he spoke. "You're saving us." "I'm saving all of us," Mary said, "including myself." Philip approached with an envelope. He handed it to John without ceremony. "The full amount," Philip said, "plus extra for seed and supplies." John stared at the money as if he didn't quite believe it was real. His hands shook as he counted it. Philip offered his hand to Mary. She took it and climbed into the wagon, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. As the wagon pulled away, Mary looked back. The farmhouse grew smaller. Her siblings waved until they were just dots on the horizon. She memorized that image, knowing she might never see it again exactly like this. The wagon rolled across vast grassland for hours. The sun climbed high and then began its descent. Philip sat silent beside her, focused on the road. Finally, Mary could stand the quiet no longer. "Where exactly is your ranch?" she asked. "About 40 miles southwest," Philip said, "near the border." "What do you raise?" "Cattle mostly, some horses. The land's good, water year-round." "You have hands working for you?" Mary asked carefully, trying to piece together what kind of life awaited her. "A few," Philip said. "Good men, loyal." Another long pause. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon and the steady clip of hooves. "You're not telling me everything," Mary said. Philip met her eyes for a moment before looking back at the road. "No," he admitted, "but I will, when we get there." The sun was setting when the wagon crested a hill. Philip slowed the horses, and Mary felt his posture change, as if he were bracing himself. "There," he said quietly. Mary looked down into the valley below, and her breath caught in her throat. She had expected a simple ranch house, maybe a barn, some corrals. What she saw was something else entirely. The main house was a grand adobe structure with red tile roofing, built in the Spanish colonial style. Arched doorways lined a wide veranda. Gardens bloomed with desert flowers even this late in the season. Outbuildings and corrals spread across the property in organized clusters. In the distance, hundreds of cattle grazed in pastures that seemed to stretch forever. This was not a small ranch. This was not even a large ranch. This was an empire. "What is this?" Mary whispered. "Home," Philip said. "Rios Ranch." A well-dressed man hurried out from the main house as the wagon approached. He wore clean clothes that looked too fine for ranch work. and he moved with the efficiency of someone managing important affairs. "Senor Rios," the man called, "everything is prepared, just as you requested." Mary turned to Philip slowly, her mind trying to catch up with what she was seeing and hearing. "Senor Rios?" she repeated. Philip removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. "Philip Rios," he said, "heir to Rios Cattle Company. My father built it. It's mine now." Mary felt the world tilt. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie," Philip said quickly. "I just didn't tell you everything." "Why?" Mary's voice shook, caught between anger and confusion. "Because I needed to know if you would choose me," Philip said. "Not my wealth, not my name, me." Mary climbed down from the wagon without waiting for his help. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself to stand straight. Inside the main house, Mary found herself in a world that seemed unreal. The great hall had high ceilings with exposed wooden beams. Mexican tiles covered the floors in intricate patterns. Carved wooden furniture filled the rooms, and wrought iron fixtures held oil lamps that cast warm light across everything. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace that could have held 3 men standing. Mary stood near the fire with her arms crossed, trying to process everything. Philip entered carrying 2 glasses of water. He set them down on a nearby table. "You have every right to be angry," he said. "I married you to save my family," Mary said, her voice tight. "You married me as what? A test?" "Not a test," Philip said. "A hope." He moved closer but kept distance between them. "I've been courted by bankers' daughters, ranchers' daughters, society women from San Antonio," he continued. "They all wanted the Rios fortune. None of them cared about the land, about building something that lasts. So you found a poor girl desperate enough to say yes," Mary said bitterly. "I found a woman strong enough to survive drought, debt, and loss," Philip said, and there was pain in his voice. "And still believe in tomorrow." Mary's anger wavered. She looked around the beautiful room again, then back at Philip. "What happens now?" she asked. "That's up to you," Philip said. "This marriage is legal, but if you want to leave, I'll arrange it. You and your family will be taken care of either way." Mary considered this. Part of her wanted to run, to escape back to the familiar poverty where, at least, she knew where she stood. But another part, the part that had read those farming books by candlelight and dreamed of better things, saw something else here. "I don't run from things," she said finally. Philip's face brightened with hope. "Then stay, be my partner, help me build something good here." Before Mary could answer, the front door opened with force. A sharp, cultured voice cut through the moment. "Philip, you've returned." A woman swept into the room like a storm dressed in silk. She was perhaps 45, elegant and commanding in a dark traveling dress that must have cost more than the Doyle family saw in a year. 2 men in expensive suits followed behind her, carrying leather folders that marked them as lawyers. The woman's eyes landed on Mary, and her polite smile froze into something harder. "And who is this?" she asked. "Aunt Victoria," Philip said, his voice taking on a formal tone. "This is Mary, my wife." The silence that followed felt like it could shatter glass. Victoria's face went through several expressions before settling on cold composure. "Your wife," she repeated. "We were married 3 days ago," Philip said. Victoria's smile returned, but it was sharp as a knife. "Philip, darling, we need to speak, privately." "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of Mary," Philip replied. Victoria's eyes flashed, but she nodded. "Very well. The board of directors has called an emergency meeting. Your recent absence has caused concern. There are contracts awaiting signature, investors growing impatient." She glanced at Mary with thinly veiled disdain. "And certain decisions must be reviewed," Victoria continued. "Decisions made without proper consultation." "You mean me," Mary said calmly. Victoria turned to her fully now, assessing. The Rios name carries weight in Texas, my dear. Society expects certain standards. Our business partners expect appropriate alliances. Mary is my choice, Philip said firmly. That's final. The board may disagree, Victoria said. She gestured to the lawyers who stepped forward with their folders. They have legal authority to review any marriage that affects company interests. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Your father's will includes provisions. May I see the document? Mary interrupted. Everyone turned to her in surprise. The lawyer hesitated, clearly not expecting a woman, especially one in a simple dress, to ask such a question. But after a moment, he handed her the papers. Mary read carefully. She had learned to read deeds and claims when her father could no longer focus through his illness. She had learned that one wrong line, one misunderstood phrase, could ruin a family. So she read slowly, methodically, while the room waited in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Mary looked up. This clause refers to marriages that diminish the estate's standing or capability. Is that correct? The lawyer looked slightly annoyed at being questioned. Yes, my dear, but the legal interpretation. Does Texas law recognize contribution of labor and expertise to marital property? Mary asked. The lawyer blinked. The second lawyer shifted his weight. It does, the first lawyer admitted slowly, but then any assessment of my value to this estate should include my knowledge of drought-resistant farming, water conservation, and sustainable land management, Mary said clearly. Methods that could increase productivity on grazing land by 30% or more. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. Philip stared at Mary with something like awe. She's right, Philip said. I've seen her methods. They work. Mary continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Furthermore, if the board questions my suitability, I'm willing to demonstrate my capabilities publicly. And how do you propose to do that? Victoria asked, her voice like ice. At the Cattlemen's Association dinner next week in San Antonio, Mary said. I understand that's where business alliances are made. Let them judge for themselves. Silence fell again, but this time it was different. Victoria hadn't expected resistance, much less a challenge. Very well, Victoria said finally, her smile dangerous. San Antonio it is. We'll see how you fare among people who matter. She swept out with her lawyers trailing behind. The door closed with a solid thud. Philip turned to Mary, amazement written across his face. You just challenged the entire Texas cattle industry. Mary felt her knees go weak now that the confrontation was over. Did I do the right thing? Absolutely, Philip said, and he was grinning. The week that followed passed in a blur of preparation. Philip's staff, who had been wary at first, began to warm to Mary when they saw her genuine interest in the ranch operations. She walked the property, asking questions, taking notes. She studied the cattle, the grazing patterns, the water systems. At night, Philip would sit with her by the fire and they would talk, really talk for the first time. He told her about his father, a Spanish immigrant who had built an empire through hard work and careful management. He told her about the pressure, the expectations, the loneliness of wealth. Mary told him about her mother, dead 5 years from a fever, about watching her father slowly give up, about reading books by candlelight and dreaming of a life larger than the one poverty allowed. I was afraid you married me out of desperation, Philip admitted one night. I did, Mary said honestly, but that doesn't mean it was wrong. Sometimes the right path starts with the wrong reasons. The night before they were to leave for San Antonio, Mary stood on the veranda looking at the stars. Philip joined her and they stood in comfortable silence. Whatever happens tomorrow, Philip said quietly, I want you to know that bringing you here was the best decision I've ever made. Mary took his hand. Then let's make sure they know it too. The Grand Hotel in San Antonio was everything Mary had imagined society would be. Beautiful, expensive, and vaguely threatening. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and mirrors. Men in expensive suits and women in silk gowns filled the space, their laughter and conversation creating a sound like rushing water. Mary entered on Philip's arm wearing a simple but elegant green dress. It was beautiful in its simplicity, but she knew immediately that everyone could see she was different. Not one of them. Conversations paused as they entered. Heads turned. Whispers spread like ripples in a pond. Victoria appeared almost immediately, flanked by an older man in expensive clothes with silver hair and calculating eyes. "Philip," Victoria said with false warmth, "you remember Mr. Harrison Kent? He's been eager to discuss the rail line expansion through your property." Kent extended his hand to Philip, then glanced at Mary with barely concealed skepticism. "Rios, and this must be your bride." "My wife, Mary," Philip said. "Mrs. Rios," Kent said, and Mary heard the condescension in his tone. "I understand you're from farming country." "I am," Mary said simply. "How quaint," Kent said. "We're discussing the railroad expansion, bringing progress to the frontier." "I understand you're planning routes through grazing land," Mary said. Kent smiled as if humoring a child. "That's men's business, Mrs. Rios. Complex matters of engineering and finance." "Then you should know," Mary said calmly, "that poorly planned rail lines disrupt cattle migration patterns, reduce grazing efficiency, and can cost ranchers thousands in lost productivity." Kent's smile tightened. A few people nearby had stopped their own conversations to listen. "I have engineers for that," Kent said. "Engineers who understand railroad construction," Mary agreed. "Do they understand cattle behavior during calving season, water access during drought?" She looked directly at him, her voice quiet but carrying. "Philip's land sits on a critical watershed. If your route cuts through the wrong section, it could affect water rights for a dozen ranches downstream. That means litigation, delays, lost money." A murmur passed through the nearby guests. It wasn't laughter, but it was interest. Before Kent could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. "Actually, I'd like to hear more." Everyone turned. Governor Henry Stevens approached, a tall, distinguished man whose presence commanded immediate respect. He smiled at Mary warmly. "Mrs. Rios," he said, "you raise an important point. Water rights litigation costs the state thousands every year." "Governor," Mary said, suddenly aware that the entire room seemed to be listening now. "With proper planning, rail expansion and ranching can coexist, but it requires understanding the land, not just mapping lines on paper." "You've given this considerable thought," the governor observed. "I grew up watching good land turn to dust because people took without understanding what they were taking from," Mary said simply. The governor nodded thoughtfully. Other ranchers leaned in, their expressions no longer dismissive but interested. Mary could feel the shift in the room, like a change in temperature. Victoria's face had gone tight with controlled anger. This was not going according to her plan. Then another woman approached, beautiful and polished in an expensive blue gown. Isabel Martinez, daughter of one of the wealthiest ranch families in Texas. She smiled at Philip with familiar warmth before turning to Mary. "Philip, it's been too long," Isabel said. "Father was hoping you'd reconsider our partnership proposal." She looked at Mary with polite condescension. "And you must be the girl from the prairie. How quaint." "Mary Rios," Mary said calmly, "and yes, I grew up on a small farm." "How difficult that must have been," Isabel said, her sympathy clearly false. "You must feel quite overwhelmed here." "Not overwhelmed," Mary said. "Observant." "Observant?" Isabel laughed. "I've noticed that everyone here talks about land values and market prices," Mary said. "But very few discuss soil health or herd genetics. They talk about expansion, but not sustainability." She looked directly at Isabel, her voice gentle but firm. "Wealth built on understanding lasts. Wealth built on fashion fades." Several nearby ranchers chuckled. Isabel's perfect smile vanished, replaced by shocked offense. Governor Stevens spoke up again, his voice carrying across the room. "Mrs. Rios, I'm forming an advisory committee on agricultural development. Would you be willing to serve?" Mary felt her heart skip. "I would be honored, Governor." "Excellent," he said. "We need practical voices, not just theoretical ones." Victoria's face had gone pale. In one evening, Mary had done what Victoria had feared most. She had made herself valuable, not as Philip's wife, but in her own right. Later, near the terrace, Victoria cornered them both. Her composure had cracked, revealing the desperation underneath. "You think one evening changes anything?" Victoria hissed. "The board still has authority. One appointment doesn't erase your background." "You're right," Mary said quietly. "It doesn't erase where I came from, but it proves where I'm going." "You don't belong in this world," Victoria said. "She belongs wherever she chooses to be," Philip said firmly. "And if you try to undermine her again, you'll answer to me and to the board when they see how valuable she is to this company's future." Victoria stared at them both, and Mary saw the moment she realized she had lost. The older woman straightened, gathering the remains of her dignity. "This isn't over," she said coldly. "Yes," Mary said simply. "It is." Victoria walked away, and Mary felt Philip's hand tighten on hers. Weeks later, golden sunrise spread across Rios Ranch. Cattle grazed peacefully in pastures where new irrigation channels ran like veins bringing life to the land. The gardens bloomed. The buildings stood strong. Mary stood on the veranda writing notes in a journal. She wore practical clothes now, a split riding skirt and boots, her hair in a long braid down her back. She had stopped trying to look like a society woman. She looked like herself, someone who worked the land and understood it. Philip approached with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat beside her. "The eastern pasture is thriving," he said. "Your rotation system is working." "Give it a full season," Mary said. "Then we'll know for sure." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ranch wake up around them. "I got a letter from your father," Philip said. "The farm is recovering. Your brothers are helping with the new well you designed." "Good," Mary said softly. "Do you regret it?" Philip asked. "Any of it?" Mary considered the question carefully, as she considered everything now. "I regret that it took desperation to get me here," she said. "But I don't regret where I am now." She looked at him, this man who had gambled on her when the rest of the world had seen only a poor farmer's daughter. "You gave me a choice when the world tried to take choices away," she said. "That matters." "You gave me something too," Philip said. "A partner. Someone who sees what this place could become." Mary leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder. In the distance, ranch hands began their day's work. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse. The land woke up to possibility. Some stories begin with rescue, Mary thought. Ours began with a gamble, his and mine. He gambled that I was stronger than circumstances made me seem. I gambled that his proposal was more than desperation, disguised as opportunity. We both won. The land doesn't lie. It tells you when hope is running out, but it also tells you when something new is beginning, when roots find water, when seeds find sun, when 2 people find each other in the middle of nowhere and build something that lasts. Mary stood, offering her hand to Philip. He took it, rising beside her. "Come on," she said. "We have work to do." They walked together toward the stables, partners in every sense of the word. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, painting the ranch in shades of gold and promise. The land stretched out before them, wild and beautiful, and theirs to shape into something that would outlast them both. And in the quiet morning air, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the future taking root.